Okay, 6 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. And Superintendent, if you please call the roll.
Absolutely. President Holt,
Present.
Clerk Grigsby,
Present.
Trustee Poole,
Present.
Trustee Travis,
Present.
Trustee Wedge.
Present.
And is there any public comment on our closed session agenda items? Seeing none, it is 6 o'clock. We will recess the closed session and reconvene here at 7. In here in open session. And Clerk Grigsby, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely. Here it is. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh. No action was taken in closed session. And I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the ayes have it. Starting off with public comment. Do we have any public comment on items not on tonight's agenda? Not seeing any, so we'll move right to 7A, association comments from AUTA.
Good evening, everyone. I had a prepared statement tonight that I was going to read, but we had our AUTA end of the year party today. And the thread of the conversations that I heard were pretty consistent. A lot of them were, hey, I had 2 runners in my class today. Hey, my classroom blew up and we had to evacuate. Hey, I ordered band materials that still haven't been delivered. Hey, I've ordered PE equipment and still it hasn't been delivered. And so I kind of reconfigured my thoughts, and a young teacher that we hired in August is resigning. And she wrote a very reflective piece that I would like to share with you because I was almost in tears because this is how she feels and this is how her experience has been. Dear Auburn Union School District board members and staff, as I prepare to resign from my position with AUSD, I feel compelled to share some reflections on the reasons behind my decision. While compensation is often assumed to be the primary motivator for seeking employment elsewhere, I want to emphasize that my choice was driven by deeper, more foundational concerns. Although being paid less than educators in surrounding districts has presented challenges, the greater issue has been a persistent sense of being undervalued and undersupported. Throughout my time at AUSD, I have experienced a lack of responsiveness to teacher safety concerns, board decisions that do not reflect the best interest of our students, families, or staff, and a pattern of fiscal choices that appear misguided with the needs of the classrooms and our students. Inadequate class sizes and insufficient attention from the district leadership to teachers' feedback to why we have these added challenges. Perhaps most disheartening has been the absence of consistent, meaningful efforts to address ongoing behavioral issues across all of our schools. The strategies imposed often lack follow-through, and the priority seems to be reducing suspension numbers rather than confronting the increase of suspensible offenses that disrupt learning in our environments and compromise the safety of both students and staff. Policies appear to be more focused on optics rather than outcomes. Furthermore, the lack of board presence on school campuses sends a clear message that the day-to-day realities faced by educators are not being fully seen or understood. This disconnect has contributed significantly to the sense of discouragement among our staff. Disappointment doesn't fully capture the sentiment of how many of us feel. Without a shift in values and priorities, the district risks continuing to lose dedicated teachers. The decision to leave has not been easy, and it has not been based on salary alone. Had I felt that the district leadership had truly valued and supported its teachers, not just in words but in actions, I would have remained in my role under the current compensation structure. This is not just about employment. It's about fostering a district culture that prioritizes the well-being and growth of both students and our staff. I hope that my experience contributes to an honest reflection on how we can do better, serve our students, our schools, our educators, and more importantly, our students and our families better. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anyone here from CSCA tonight? Not seeing any, so we'll move right on to 8 and our presentation on the overview of surplus property process.
Good evening. It's nice to see some of you again, new faces. My name is Ann Collins, and I am an attorney at Lozano Smith, and I will be presenting with Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Domenico with Capital PFG, and we're the financial advisor for the district. I recognize some faces, but a couple of new ones. We've actually been the financial advisor for almost 20 years. So a lot of different boards and a lot of history there. If you want to talk through that.
Go ahead. You can skip right on through our faces.
So just to give you a little background, especially since we've got a couple of new board members. As part of the district's capital funding plan, so we have look at your capital funding sources each year, and they are minimal, unfortunately. But you had a facilities master plan that was completed back in 2017. And as part of that master plan, we looked at any available capital funding sources that the district had and put them into a capital funding plan. At that time, and even before that, we had a recommendation to look at some of your surplus property that wasn't used for school site purposes, and evaluate whether you could actually generate some funding, whether for capital facilities or for other purposes through those assets. So that was a big discussion back in 2017, and we kind of keep bringing it up as we go because those properties are still sitting there kind of untouched. And this board actually recommended that we begin the process of doing that evaluation. And there were 3 sites that were identified. Sherland Tract, and we're going to go through these later to show you kind of exactly where they are. So I'm just going to go through them by name now, and we'll put a pin in it and come back. We have a property on the Rock Creek school site, but not the actual classroom site or play area site. It's right on the corner of Highway 49. We call it the Rock Creek Commercial area. And then we have what we call the Atwood property. So 3 sites that were specifically provided to staff to explore the possibility of evaluating them as assets and seeing whether the district could achieve some revenue generating mechanisms through these assets. Last year, we embarked on that process, and there is a legal process that must be followed before you can really do anything with surplus property. And I'm going to let Ann kind of go through those, and then I'll jump back in and talk about what those sites are.
So before the district can do anything long-term as far as disposition of surplus property, there are legal procedures that need to be followed. So we are really lucky with surplus property. We get 2 sets of laws, right? So we've got the education code that is going to govern and require specific procedures. And then we also have the government code. We have the Surplus Land Act. So we are navigating 2 separate bodies of law that both deal with surplus property. And so we are going to walk through that process, but just understand that this process, you can skip to the next slide, is required by these 2 sets of laws to allow the board to consider options moving forward with these long-term decisions of how that property will be used or disposed of. So the process generally is outlined here on the slide. These are the steps that are required, and we're going to walk through each one with a little bit more detail. So starting with the 7-Eleven committee, as Kathy said, you identified these properties. Okay, so 7-Eleven committee is convened. Next slide, please. And so this is an education code requirement. We will talk about the fact that this has actually already been done. But what's important about the 7-Eleven committee, just as a reminder, is that it's an advisory committee only. It doesn't usurp the board's decision-making process. So it's just advisory only. And then we will talk, I'll pass it back to Kathy to talk about that process here.
And your 7-Eleven committee, if you may remember, last meeting presented their recommendations and their findings. And your 7-Eleven committee really dug in. And I don't know if that came across, but it was pretty obvious to us. They really rolled up their sleeves, dug in. They evaluated the sites. We did site visits. They studied enrollment and capacity that Jeremy presented to them. And they really took their charge seriously. I just want to commend that committee on the work that they did and the work that they put into those recommendations. They met 6 times from September 24 to March 2025. I think we had on the calendar 3 meetings. So they kind of doubled that because they really were interested in making those sound recommendations. I mentioned the enrollment and capacity. They also looked at the zoning allowances for each property and really went in line item by line item on what the allowable zoning was and felt whether and made recommendations as to whether that would be an appropriate use based on what the committee's preferences are. And it wasn't always a unanimous decision. There definitely were debates that they had, and they had conversations. So you got well thought out recommendations that were based on a majority of the committee's recommendations. As a result of this, they established a priority list that would be acceptable for the community on the various uses of the property. So I do want to go through and remind you of what the committee's recommendations were for each property, but also give you some additional information on the properties just so you're aware of those. Next slide, please. So the first one we want to talk about is Sherland Tract. It's actually 4 different parcels, kind of behind a subdivision, but the terrain is somewhat hilly. That parcels 3 and 4 there, I don't know if you can see. 3 and 4 are kind of up right behind the subdivision, then it kind of comes down into more of an agricultural area. And parcel number 2 is really just it looks like a single family home site at the end of a cul-de-sac. So you've got 4 different parcels, some of them in city limits and some of them in the county. So I also want to differentiate there. It's a total of about 47.4 acres when you look at all 4 of those parcels. There's that number 2 is just a 0.44 acre residential lot. That's zoned single family residential. And that's within city limits. Then you have those 2 4+ acre parcels, so just both over a little over 4 acres. That's noted as number 3 and number 4. Those are zoned exclusive agricultural district. So they want that, the zoning is agricultural in nature. And then you have the big chunk, number 1, and that is zoned rural residential by the county. So that's the county property. Just wanted to give you that perspective. So when the committee made their recommendations, they made their recommendations by parcel. Parcel number 2, that little one, they were recommending that the property just is sold as a single family residential house. Again, if you walk into the cul-de-sac, it's just at the end, and that's kind of an obvious recommendation. The rest of it took a lot of thought, because what they really said is this is right behind a housing development. It is rural. There's animals run on that property. People walk on that property. I think there's some people that do things they shouldn't do on that property with regards to hunting, possibly shooting. I'm not really sure. But right now, it is kind of a liability for the district. And I don't want to speak for staff, but I think that there's a cost to maintaining this property that goes beyond just the regular maintenance. There's kind of a liability there that isn't a quantifiable cost, but there is a risk there. And we actually talked about that with the committee. So underutilization of property has caused that type of risk for the district. And so the committee was thinking that there could be alternative uses. And one of the big recommendations was to consider this as a school farm and partner with the high school district, or partner with Sierra College, or partner with FFA, or whoever that organization is, to create an educational advantage for our students that is in line with what the community would have an interest in. If that is not feasible, we could then consider looking at leasing that land to, say, Green Acres or another nursery, but get that property used to try to eliminate some of that risk to the district. And it would create a revenue stream to the district. So those were kind of the 2 recommended options for Sherland Tract. The Rock Creek commercial property, and I mentioned this is kind of off to the side. If you actually drive by here, it looks like it's not even part of the school site. Currently, there's a lot of, that's kind of a homeless encampment is really what we're seeing on that property. And again, we talk about risk to the district. This is underutilized, and it seems to be highly desired because it's right there on Highway 49. So the committee, let me get the acreage on there. It's not even a full acre. It's 45,000 square feet, and it's zoned office and professional. And that also makes sense. Kind of right adjacent to it is a little commercial area right across the street. You've got the hospital. It makes a lot of sense that that is zoned office and professional. The committee recommended, though, that the district for now continue to own the land. And the thinking is that Rock Creek school site is kind of in an unknown state right now. We don't operate it for school. We have other purposes on there. But this may be something that in the future, the board may want to consider evaluating that site as a surplus site. But for now, until we know what we're going to do with that entire campus, we want to just look at the Rock Creek commercial site, and they recommended maintaining ownership and investigating opportunities to achieve some type of revenue source from it. So that is something I know that Jeremy has already gotten some ideas for, where we actually don't have to declare it surplus, and we can continue owning the site, but actually create a revenue generating mechanism from it. And that is consistent with the committee's recommendation. The last site, everybody calls the Atwood property. And I got to tell you, I had no idea where this property was for years, because it is not on Atwood Road. And it added a lot of confusion until we finally got the records from the county and found out that it is on Kemper Road. So the Atwood properties on Kemper Road, I have no idea how the name Atwood got there, but it's been called the Atwood property for years. So the Atwood property is, pause and look it up, 28 acres on Kemper Road, zoned residential single family. And you can see kind of on the north, there is a subdivision. And on what I think is the east, is more of like kind of rural residential. But it is surrounded by residential property. And again, that site was actually originally intended to be a middle school site. So just why you have that large piece of property. Clearly, it was not needed based on the enrollment in the district. The committee recommended selling this property. It was clear that the district's current and projected future student enrollment is not going to justify a full comprehensive middle school, especially in that location. And the housing type similar and adjacent to it really lends itself to residential housing, and the committee felt like that would be the best revenue generating mechanism for the district, is to actually sell the property and then reinvest those proceeds into capital improvements, which would be the required use of the proceeds. And something I think Ann's going to talk about, when you sell surplus property, it isn't just money that can go into your general fund. There are restrictions on the use of proceeds from the sale of surplus property. So in this situation, you would need to put that money into capital improvements, which there are significant improvement needs at the district. So that was kind of the summary of the properties themselves. And do you want to take this one? You want me to run?
Go
do
ahead.
this
Yeah,
one.
you can.
Okay. So the plan, just kind of summing all this up, based on the committee's recommendations, but also kind of what staff is recommending based on what's happening right now in the economy and what we know about the district's financial needs, we do think it makes sense to have a conversation about that Sherland Track property. Let's see if maybe there's a lease opportunity or partnership opportunity with the high school district, with Sierra College, where we can provide our students with an educational environment that they don't currently have at our sites. But also there's the potential for revenue from those other partners that we could reinvest into our district. And we would like to take the opportunity to investigate that and bring ideas back to the board. It may be that the partners say no thanks, and as an elementary district, it's going to be a little more difficult for us to operate a farm. So we may have to then come back with some other alternatives, perhaps along the lines of what the committee recommended. We also recommend evaluating the revenue generating options for the Rock Creek site, and Jeremy's been busy doing that and considering license agreements, and that's already in progress. Of course, anything final would come back to the board. And we want to consider having the board consider declaring that Atwood site as surplus and evaluate options for maximizing revenue from the site. Tonight, what we're asking you to do is to initiate the process. We don't have answers yet because it's going to take a little bit of work to figure out the best way to maximize those resources. But for now, we want to know if the board even has an interest in going ahead with that process before we spend the resources to investigate and try to maximize the proceeds from the sale. So we're at that beginning stage that there's a process there as we go forward and implement it.
And so just to kind of talk a little bit, we're going to come back with ideas and Kathy's going to put those together. So, right, Sherland Track and Atwood. The difference, though, is that by declaring Atwood surplus, you can consider those long-term decisions about disposition versus with Sherland Track, it's maintaining ownership, more short-term options. So for surplus property, these are some of the options that we can come back and talk about. Again, declaring the property surplus does not commit this board to any of these options at this time, and it does not commit this board to selling the property. You always maintain the ability to keep it if that's what you choose. So you can always retain the property. You can sell the property. You can do a long-term lease. You can do a property exchange. So there are a lot of options out there for thinking long-term about how this property can best be disposed of or used for, the purposes that Kathy was talking about. So going to the next slide, the board's declaration of property being surplus. This comes from, again, Education Code, may, Government Code, shall. So under the Surplus Land Act, in order to even take that next step to come back and consider these long-term options, you must declare the property surplus or exempt surplus land. Because this property was subject to 711 committee, it is exempt surplus land. What does that mean? You are exempting yourself from these certain statutory provisions under the Surplus Land Act. Specifically, you're excluding yourself from offering this for affordable housing. Not to say that you couldn't do that if you wanted, but that's just those statutory requirements are exempt. So again, it does not commit the board to anything at this time. It's just that declaration. So the next step after the declaration of the property being exempt surplus land would be the required offers. So before you can move forward with selling or disposing of that property, you have to make statutory offers. There are quite a few of them. It's a variety of entities based on these different categories. You can see again, Ed Code and Government Code walk through all of those. These can be done, kind of concurrently or staggered, but they have timelines. And what the board's obligation is here, or the district's obligation, is to negotiate in good faith if any of these entities respond with an interest in buying the property or entering into a lease. So again, there are timelines associated with that. Again, not a requirement to sell. If you end up not reaching an agreement that are on terms that you like, then you would say, okay, we weren't able to reach an agreement, and now we move on to the next step. So the next step after all those required offers go out, and those offers would go out via letter, via publication in the newspaper, and so the slide. So assuming that you don't have, you don't reach an agreement through that, you then would have another resolution, and that's the resolution of intent to sell. This is a required resolution that has to be approved by a 2/3 vote. And what it says is, hey, we've done all these steps. We still don't have any type of sale or agreement to sell. So now we are intending to move forward with the sale of this property or a long-term lease. You adopt that resolution by a 2/3 vote, then you must publish notice of that resolution being adopted with the criteria that you're going to set for what I call an auction. It's a competitive bid where you take the highest price. You set the minimum price threshold. You set the terms. You actually will attach a draft purchase and sale agreement. That all gets published at least 15 days before the date that you have a meeting, and you get all of those offers in, you get all the bids in, you open them up. You also have a process to call for oral bids before you can accept any of those offers. Next slide. So, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. As to the competitive bidding process / auction, there is an opportunity to seek a waiver from the State Board of Education that can modify this process into something that gives the board a little more flexibility as far as the terms and the process for what that looks like. That is something that if the board is interested in, we can talk more about it. It has its own process, its own engagement with the committee, with the community, with your labor partners. But it does give a little more flexibility in negotiating. There is some time because you have to prepare an application and then wait for the State Board of Education to approve that application. But that is an option that some boards take. Do you want to talk about the current status? Or? Sure. Okay.
So where you can see the red, we've completed the identification of the property, convened the 7-Eleven committee. What's in front of you tonight is a resolution to declare the Atwood property surplus, so that we've anticipated on May 29th, but if not, then we don't have to declare anything surplus and nothing else happens. But if you want to declare the property surplus, then we would start exploring options for the sale of that property. And I alluded to this earlier. What we're trying to do is maximize the value of the property and minimize the resources we're expending on that. So for example, we could go in and we could get full entitlements and get single family lots. But your staff has a job of educating kids, and Brittany's looking at me like, I don't want to do that. So we've got to balance that maximizing the value of the asset with what kind of investment we want to make at the local level. And could we get a higher value if we went all the way and became a real estate developer? Yes. I don't know that we want to do that. So we want to get some guidance, and this is something we would talk about with the board in closed session, and Ann can touch on that in a little bit, because we've got to think about strategies related to that sale of that site and maximizing the value on the site. If you end up moving forward based on whatever that plan is, then we go back into kind of this notice and offer process that Ann walked through. I got to tell you, I don't think that that's coming back at your next meeting. Just this process, it's taken a little while. It's not unusual that this process takes a little while. So I want to kind of set your expectations that we're not going to have this property on the market over the summer. This is a somewhat lengthy process, and we want to be responsible because we are talking about a significant amount of land here. I mean, these aren't small parcels that we're talking about. So I do think I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is the beginning of the process, even though it feels like we've been doing it for a little while. And strategy wise, we may come back and your board may say, I don't care, we're not doing a thing. We're not even rezoning that. We're going to sell it as is, and we're just going to hope for the best. That may end up being the direction. So that's all stuff that we will work on with you as we move forward.
Questions?
Yeah. It's a lot, isn't it? And like I said, this is the beginning. We don't have to make all the decisions for the end. We only have to make small decisions today.
Looked like it. Any questions on that presentation? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Right. And next 8B, our reading intervention program update.
Hello, President Holt, members of the board, good evening. I'm Kara Schwint. Just as a reminder, the General Education Program Specialist for Auburn Union School District. And tonight I'm going to speak to you about an overview of our reading intervention program in AUSD. Thank you. Go ahead, next slide. So our objectives for tonight is to familiarize first and foremost with our current reading programs in AUSD. I'm also going to present a comparative analysis of some data that we have related to these two programs and the recommendation of the district staff, and then looking at the evolution of the reading program in the subsequent years coming up. So that's going to be our goals for tonight. Next slide, Dave. So why is a robust reading intervention program critical for students' success in AUSD? So there's a quote there. This quote is from a leading federal agency that's dedicated to child and human development. And it paints a very clear picture on the importance of an early reading intervention program that's both systematic and explicit. Next slide. So we're going to talk about the two programs. The first program, and I had no idea that this was that actual name of the program. We always call it SIPS, but it's Systematic Instruction in Phonological Awareness, Phonics, and Sight Words, but commonly known as SIPS around district and education. Next slide. So some components of SIPS is that it is a direct and explicit instruction program that focuses on foundational reading skills. And it does this through the use of phonological awareness, spelling sounds, as well as high frequency words, also known as sight words that students will have to read. Some key features of instruction is that the levels of SIPS are aligned with specific stages of reading development. It does homogeneous groups for students so that we can place them in common needs or common skills groups. It allows for placement assessment so we can create those homogeneous groups and have students working together. It also has ongoing teacher support embedded, and then also it has a progress monitoring component with the mastery assessments as students progress through the lesson. So that's some key features of the instruction. And then you guys all know MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. So SIPS is directly connected with MTSS in that it supports our multilingual learners, especially in explicit spelling sound instruction. And then it also acts as a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention support for our schools where students are getting tier 1 support in the classroom. So currently we have SIPS being piloted at 2 of our sites. That would be Skyridge and EV Kane, and that is done with our reading intervention teachers, 1 at each site. And we're using the current levels of beginning, extension, challenge, and plus, which covers a wide variety of kinder to 5th grade student needs. And then next slide, Dave. The other program that we're going to look at is by Fontes and Pinnell. It's called Level Literacy Instruction. We kind of dub it LLI because, you know, we love our acronyms in education. So this program was purchased post-COVID, and it was used mainly at our Title I schools, which at the time was Auburn Elementary and Rock Creek Elementary. And so the key features of this is that it does have leveled books, and with each of those leveled books, it has an accompanying lesson. And the lesson goes deep into reading comprehension strategies and ways to support students. And then it also does a little bit with some writing as well as some word work, which is also phonics. It does provide small group intervention for students who are having difficulties with reading and writing. And there is an emphasis on teaching those comprehension strategies for students with it. Next slide, Dave. And then it does again align with MTSS in that it supports our EL students, our multilingual learners. Oh, there's probably one before. Oh, you're going too fast. One more. There it is. It's okay. And then it does also support students who have individualized education plans, also known as IEPs, when it's appropriate to meet those students' goals. And that's again, tier 2, tier 3 intervention. So now, currently Auburn Elementary is using LLI. As I said before, it was a Title I school and it has been there for since post-COVID. So we do have a reading intervention teacher there using that with students at Auburn Elementary. So that's where it's currently being utilized. And then we'll get into some data. So the data set that we looked at to do that comparative analysis that I was talking about is iReady. And iReady is a diagnostic system that we use. We're in year 1 of it right now and finishing up year 1. And we assess ELA and math to students in grades 1st through 8th grade. We do this 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring. We have students take this at the same time. So it's a common assessment that we use for all of our students in 1st through 8th grade. And then the teachers can use the data to do progress monitoring, plan for interventions, and to support instruction. So we're using iReady data in our reading intervention pilot currently. We are using the ELA data, especially in the domains, including phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, literacy, and instructional and informational comprehension. So those are the domains we focus on to help place our students when we're showing that there's a need there for reading intervention. So the data, iReady does give us a lot of data. So the data set that we chose to pull and concentrate our focus on is something called typical growth percentile. Simply stated, this is what tells us if students are growing at an expected rate, faster, or slower. So typically what we do, it's a measure that's used to have students be looked at on an average growth expected for students at their age over an academic year. So there's the typical growth, and then there's the percent progress. So we used the percent progress as our data set that we were looking at for this comparative study. I'm going to go into an example on the next slide to kind of help break that down, what that means. So let's say we have 2 4th grade students. So we have student A. Student A at the beginning of the year came in low level, scoring below grade level in reading, excuse me. Throughout the year, that student made significant growth gains and is now at grade level. But the percentile or the percent progress towards annual typical growth is only 75%. That means they grew, but they grew at a little slower rate than the average 4th grader was expected to grow in a 4th grade year. And so while they did reach grade level at the end, they did it at a slower rate, which means that we would want to continue to support and monitor that child to make sure they keep pace and don't fall back behind. Where if we compare it to student B, who maybe started the year at grade level, reading at grade level, but continued to show growth and to show pace throughout this, made steady progress throughout the year, their percent progress towards annual typical growth could be 110% compared to student A. And that means they not only made that expected typical growth, but they then exceeded it. So that's kind of how we can look at what the typical percent growth percentile is. Next slide, Dave. Okay, perfect. So now what we're looking at is the data that we looked at to compare students who were participating in LLI, Fontes and Pinnell, SIPs, and then we have some overall data. So all students participated in these assessments at the same time. When we were looking at the data, we did average and we did median. So with average, we calculated by adding all the values in that data set, and then we, in the typical growth percentile data set, and then we divided by the number of the total values. And then for the median, we just took the, due to the outliers in that data set, the extreme values in that data set, we then took the middle value, which was the median, to look at how the data was split into halves. So just how, oh, stay on there. So looking at LLI data, so the average was 94.82%. So on average, students who were receiving reading instruction intervention in LLI achieved a higher percentile for the annual typical growth. However, their median was at 60.5%. So it's lower than average, which indicates a large spread of scores. So half of the students scored at or below 60.5%. This suggests that while some students performed higher, which is what pulled that average up in the average, there still was a substantial portion of students who struggled. So looking at the SIPS data just directly to the right of it, again, we took the average, which is 101%. And an average above 100% might seem unusual, but what this implies is that students on average exceeded the benchmark within the assessment. And then the median being at 91%, this is also high and it's very close to the same number as the average. And that indicates that a majority of students in that data set performed well and consistently. And again, SIPS was done at both Skyridge and EV Kane. So that's where that data set came from those students receiving SIPS intervention at those sites and then pulling that data from iReady. So overall, the comparison shows that the SIPS data shows a stronger overall performance than LLI. Both the average and the median are higher for SIPS. SIPS also demonstrates consistently the average and median being closer, suggests that students achieved similar high scores, and LLI has a larger discrepancy between the average and the median. And then just below there is an added data set that we did after we published. So that data set reflects all second through fifth graders because that was the target group that we pulled from for the data, because those were the students who were consistently pulled for intervention at all three sites. So we took the data set for all three sites, all second, all third, fourth, and fifth graders, regardless if they received intervention or not. This is their data set. So their average of annual typical growth was 91.6%. Their median was 61%. So as you can see, SIPS data outperformed both students who received LLI intervention and then all students in the district.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So looking then, thank you, Dave, at the all second to fifth iReady data,
Yes.
does that suggest that we should have more students in the intervention program too? Because I'm looking at our averages below the others.
It may mean that we need to broaden our tier 1 and tier 2 interventions that are happening in class. Perhaps maybe getting more students involved in a more direct, explicit, systematic intervention like SIPS, or we need to revisit what our tier 1 supports are in class, but also our tier 2 supports in class, because students can receive tier 1 and tier 2 intervention in the classroom. Tier 2 and tier 3 would happen in reading intervention. So it might suggest that we need to look at our interventions that we're doing for tier 1, tier 2 in the classroom for reading. It's a great question. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So which program do we feel like best provides an explicit, direct, systematic reading intervention to support our students who are struggling with foundational skills? Our recommendation in the Educational Services Department is that we move forward having SIPS as our district-wide reading intervention program. So what that would mean is that we would continue the use of SIPS at both EV Kane and Skyridge, and then we would bring that program and purchase all the necessary materials for Auburn Elementary. as well as training the reading intervention teacher there and all the reading intervention teachers in SIPs moving forward in the 25-26 school year. Any questions?
A question.
Yeah.
Is this curriculum, is it the same curriculum used for students who have dyslexia? Would this be
Do you
the
want
same
to
kind of
in?
intervention?
Good question. So the SIPS programs, the four that Kara went over, could certainly be used with students who might have characteristics of a student with dyslexia, but they also have an additional piece called SIPS multisensory. And so we've talked about potentially looking at that as well as we increase our usage of SIPS.
Especially with the reading difficulties risk screener that will be implemented next year, and we'll be screening K-2 students for reading difficulties, which could bring to light reading difficulties such as dyslexia or other reading difficulties. Yeah. Any other questions?
I just wanted to know how the schools chose which program to pilot.
Great question. So Auburn Elementary has been using, as I mentioned, has been using LLI since post-COVID. So when we came back from COVID, we purchased Fontes and Pinnell's guided reading, and then we also purchased their intervention system, LLI. And at the time, we were only using the LLI system at Title I schools, which at the time was Auburn Elementary and Rock Creek. When Auburn Elementary consolidated, we then took LLI, and at that juncture, Sky Ridge did have some Title I students, so we could use that program over at Sky Ridge. So we used that, and then this last year when we transitioned to our TK8 program, we had talked with the reading intervention teachers. We hired a new one for Evie Kane. We hired a new one for Sky Ridge. Brittany came on board and had asked a little bit more about our reading intervention program. We had talked about the possibility of bringing SIPs because it is a very robust program, and we have a lot of teachers who have been trained formally in it, including our reading intervention teachers that we had for Sky Ridge and for Evie Kane. So when we talked about the possibility of a pilot and looking at the two programs and developing this comparative study and analysis using the common assessment data, it made it very easy that those two teachers who were already familiar with SIPs and could do some light training could then utilize that program. And then the teacher at Auburnell was happy to continue using LI to suit the needs of the study.
And then will the classroom teachers need to be, brought up to
Trained.
speed, trained on how to
On
use that
SIPs.
in order to use it for tier 1, tier 2?
So yes, they would have to be trained in order to use it in class. But again, many teachers are trained, and we would have to purchase more material. So next year it'll be rolled out with our reading intervention teachers, and then we can look at bringing it into classrooms as part of that tier 2 intervention. But we want to make sure that our tier 1 interventions in reading are very solid, and we have some really great structures in place so that we can have all students getting that tier 1 intervention, and then when needed, bring in tier 2 and see what we currently have. And if it means bringing in SIPs, then we can do that next step. Yeah, good questions.
And if I could add just a little bit that
Yeah.
when we sat down to talk about reading intervention, Kara and myself, I don't know, July, August, whenever that was.
And there.
The question was, we have LLI, we have SIPs, we've gone TK-8, we have some teachers trained in one, some teachers trained through the other. And it sort of seemed like at that moment, if we were just going to make a flippant decision about which one are we going to go with, it was better to say, let's take this year and let people use what they have already been trained in, and we can provide a little bit of backup for, and then see what data comes out in terms of what is most impactful for our students. So hence tonight's presentation to look at it, and our leaning towards working through the SIPS program and continuing to build that, which then would mean that we would bring surplus to you on the consent agenda next meeting to surplus LLI materials so that we could then take those out of classrooms and bring SIPs in and make sure our staff was trained.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Any other questions?
For the LLI instruction, is
Yep.
there any sort of contract breaking or any like getting out of anything early or anything?
No, we purchased those materials again post-COVID, and so once we had those materials, if we wanted to use any online resources, we would just have to pay like a fee. But otherwise, it's just a clean break for us, and just like Brittany said, surplusing the materials. Yeah, good questions.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for putting together
Thank
this data
you.
over the last year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of
So
course.
you know, it's actually former trustee Brickler got me really interested in this, shared that Sold the Story podcast, and
Mhm.
haven't been able to stop worrying about it since. So I'm
Good.
glad to see it's the direction we're headed.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Right, moving to our consent agenda. One, do we have any public comment on anything on the consent agenda? No. So we need to pull A. Is there anything anybody else would like to pull? All right, seeing none. Well, I move that we approve the consent agenda with the exception of 9A.
I'll sec-
Second.
She wins.
All right, and then clerk, if you please call a roll call vote.
Absolutely. President Holt,
Aye.
Clerk Grigsby, aye. Trustee Poole,
Aye.
Trustee Travis,
Aye.
and Trustee Wedge.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, 9A.
We pulled the personnel report just because we had one spelling error with a new onboarding teacher whose last name is Hollingshead as a VAPA teacher coming in next year. I think it was printed as Hollingsworth. So we walked in copies with the correct spelling just to make sure that we have that right before we approve it.
Great, thank you. And I move that we approve item 9A.
I'll second that one.
All right, and clerk, please conduct a roll call vote.
Absolutely. Let's start with Trustee Wedge,
Aye.
Travis, and
Aye.
Trustee Travis, and Trustee Poole,
Aye.
and Clerk Grigsby, aye, and President Holt.
Aye. The ayes have it. Okay, moving to our action items. And just again, do we have public comment on any of these? And I will stop asking. Starting with 10A, December 2024 board policy updates.
Okay, so I'll talk about this one briefly. So we brought board policy forward in the December packet last meeting as an informational item for a first read. We had a pretty robust discussion around, and there was a copy of the printed. Hold on one second, I'm going to get it. There's a copy of the printed board policy for you, regulation 1250, visitors and outsiders, and the corresponding board policy. Oh, I'm sorry, we printed the regulation and we should have printed the board policy. You all have the reg, right? 1250?
We have the reg.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I apologize. You needed the BP 1250. So let me find it in here and you can take a look. Hold on. Should be around page 11. Mine's loading.
I think it's page 10. I'm
Page
counting it
10.
right. If I'm counting it right. Mine's not numbered.
That's not my page down.
All right, well, mine is loading, so I'm doing great. So I can't even look quite yet. Give me a second.
I'm on page 29 for me.
That's the reg. Go
Oh,
right
that is the
above
reg,
that.
yeah.
See if you have the BP.
25.
Okay, page 25. And then if you scroll down, you should see. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not in red, but if you read the paragraph, presence of sex offender on campus, that paragraph has been modified to start with, the first sentence is the same, but if we get to sentence 2, I believe it is, this is new language, I'm just going to read it. The principal shall deny requests for entry to the school campus or grounds made by a person who is neither a parent or guardian and is required to register as a sex offender. While the educational rights afforded to parents and guardians shall be met, when parents or guardians are registered as sex offenders, it is the preference of the board to provide access through electronic means or in person in person at the district office. Therefore, the principal may consider requests for entry to the school campus or grounds made by a person who is a parent or guardian and is required to register as a sex offender only after considering electronic and off-site options as described previously. Then the remainder of the paragraph remains the same. So that language was written after consultation with our attorneys, which we had talked about last time during first read, to essentially say if you're not a parent or guardian, the answer will always be no. But if you are a parent or guardian, while we won't violate your educational rights, we would do either a Zoom, Google Meet, or allow in-person meetings here at the district office. If there was a situation, I don't know what that might be, but if something came up where that was entirely impossible because it required a parent to be on the school campus, that would only if the other means were considered first, could a principal then consider having a person come on campus at their request. Any questions on that one?
I had sent in the question asking about possibly adding a stipulation of having either our SRO or law
that's right.
enforcement involved with that. And I realized that that might make it more complicated. That's not really my concern here. But I wonder if we could say an attempt would be made to have the SRO or the law enforcement, just as I really don't want these people on the campuses. And so anything that I can throw in there from the board, I'm happy to do. And so I feel like it makes our students safer to make sure those people aren't on our campuses. That's where I'm coming from on that, but you guys can discuss.
No, I hear you. And I agree with you. Just considering what brought up the issue too with potentially requiring the SRO, because we can't impose, a duty on
Sure.
APD or the sheriff's office. Wonder if you'd be amenable to something. Well, first, actually, I think the situation that this describes unlikely to happen. But if you'd be amenable to even just language requiring an escort at all times. I mean, I think they already would be, but if we make it very clear that they would be escorted at all times by a staff member.
Yeah, yeah, that would work for me. I mean, I want to make sure that it's uncomfortable for them to arrive here, is what I'm saying. So if that's the language the board agrees with, then I would be for that.
I mean, I can't think of anything that wouldn't be satisfied by off district or off site.
I know, but yeah, I know.
I hear you.
Just trying to seal that up, Greg.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I definitely like the direction that this is going into, as far as I think the main concern is being left alone. So any kind of escort or, pre-approval process, I think, we definitely have the opportunity now to strengthen this up.
Is that something that you would have to go back and talk to the attorneys about to work up language or?
No.
Okay.
No, I had a pretty robust conversation with her. I don't think there would be a problem. My question to the board would be, where do you want it? Because I think, we could add it as a last line. As necessary, the principal shall consult with law enforcement authorities before allowing the presence of any such person at school or other school activity. And then maybe the sentence after that, if at any time a sex offender is allowed to be on campus, they should at a minimum be escorted by a staff member.
Or they shall.
They shall,
Yeah.
yeah. Does that
Yeah.
sound
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
thank you.
I'm gonna write it down, then I'm gonna read it to you one more time.
Okay.
Okay. If at any time a registered sex offender is allowed on a school campus, they shall at a minimum be escorted by a staff member.
Mhm.
Is that good? Okay.
Yep.
All right, outside of that policy, I don't think there were any other changes made out different from what you saw in first read, so. Emily or Amber, do you missing anything? Okay. Nope.
Okay, so with that change, with that modification, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to move to approve, item 10A.
I'll second.
Right, and all those in favor
Hi.
Aye.
and those opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Next is item 10B, resolution number 24-25-109, the board governance handbook.
Okay, so there was one change made per our recommendation at the first read. Pull that up. That was under the new trustee onboarding checklist on page 9. There we go. So we had meet with the superintendent and board president. We added meet with the superintendent and board president to review annual board goals and aligned superintendent goals, and then review superintendent evaluation process and documents. And then it continues from there. I believe everything else in the document remains the same. And staff recommends approving as written unless the board has additional changes.
Does anybody else have an additional change?
No.
All right.
No.
Good work, everybody.
Proud of us.
All right. So I'll move that we approve resolution 24-25-109, board governance handbook.
I'll second.
And clerk, could you please call the roll?
Absolutely. President Holt,
Aye.
Clerk Grigsby, aye. Trustee Poole,
Aye.
Trustee Travis,
Aye.
and Trustee Wedge.
Aye.
Yay.
The ayes have it. Moving to 10C, approval of the revised schedule of board meetings for 2025.
Okay. So we're bringing our public hearing of LCAP and the budget, to our next meeting, which is June 12th. We then have to approve the budget and the LCAP together at a meeting that is separate from the meeting at which we have a public hearing. So we've added a special board meeting the following day on June 13th, paying attention to the fact that open session will be first at 5 p.m. Just for anyone listening and wanting to attend, it will be early that day, and closed session will follow open session. So our intention is to meet at 5 p.m. And then given that we do not have items at this time that need to go forward on the July 17th agenda, so we propose canceling the July meeting of the board. We just need a motion to approve unless there's questions or comments.
And are there questions or comments?
No.
All right. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
And do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Seeing none. And moving to 10D, resolution 24-25-110, declaring Atwood property exempt surplus land.
So this is the resolution that follows our special presentation from our attorney Ann Collins and consultant Kathy Domenico, which would be a resolution from the board declaring Atwood surplus property, allowing us to open the door to move forward with next steps. Oh, and sorry, staff recommends approving the resolution.
Are there any questions?
No.
Concerns there?
None.
All right. And do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 24-25-110.
I'll second.
And clerk, if you please call the roll.
Absolutely.
Call vote.
President Holt,
Aye.
Clerk Grigsby, aye. Trustee Poole,
Aye.
Trustee Travis,
Aye.
and Trustee Wedge.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay. Moving to item 11, 11A, the multi-payer fee schedule update.
Okay. So there was a request for an update regarding multi-payer fee schedule. So I'm here to present that tonight. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Dave. So my goal this evening is to outline, well, let me start with this. And we talked about this pretty extensively, I think in January it was. Um, Auburn participates in the Capacity Grants Consortium Community of Practice. That's a mouthful. But that is essentially a group of us, districts represented throughout Placer County, that works with PCOE to learn more about multi-payer fee schedule, which is now just generally being called fee schedule. So I'll probably refer to it that way throughout, but in the past has been referred to as multi-payer fee schedule. And part of that is attending monthly online meetings and then being invited to additional informational sessions. So I will provide sort of an outline of all of those learnings, as well as some pretty important, I think, for us in Auburn, information related to an information session I went to, our Zoom session in May, and then talk a little bit about that, answer any questions you have as well. All right, go ahead, next slide, please. As a reminder, the purpose of this consortium is to develop readiness for all participating districts to participate in fee schedule, should they so choose. As a reminder, we're not moving forward with one of the cohorts through Department of Healthcare Services. The fourth one, you had to apply in January, February, somewhere at the start of the year. So we're not in any of those early onboarding cohorts, but an opportunity could be afforded to us at a couple entry points throughout future years if we so choose. So the idea is just to build our readiness if we decide to jump on board with fee schedule at some point. The overarching goals of these meetings are to provide us with updates and information. And it's also an avenue for us as LEAs to provide feedback through PCOE, who then participates in work with Department of Healthcare Services directly around fee schedule. And then, of course, also connection with other districts just to see what they're doing. Some districts around us are starting to onboard to the fee schedule, although no one is billing quite yet, except for PCOE, who just started billing a few weeks ago. And so we can kind of learn from people that are in the process. All right, go ahead, Dave. After our January discussion, I've attended that's not true. I've attended 3 sessions because April was office hours and there wasn't necessarily any burning questions there. But I went to the February session, which was on third-party administrators and billing. In March, there was a capacity summit. So that was a much broader topic, but it was part of the consortium, which I attended as well. I'll talk about each of these in turn, by the way. Did not attend office hours, but those are available in April for questions. And then in May 2025, the topic was community-based organization spotlight. I'll talk a little bit about that community-based organization and family communication, primarily looking at flyers going out through DHCS and providing feedback on that to inform families of fee schedule. The additional session through the consortium that we were given information about was through Santa Clara County Office of Ed. It was an online presentation on wellness coaches that happened on the 15th. So I'll talk about that as well. All right, so third-party billing administrators. This one, and I'm going to call them, because as Kara said, we love acronyms, so TPAs. So the idea here is that if we are going to build a fee schedule, we are providing a service to students. Then there's this group called Carillon that connects with Kaiser, Sutter, whoever is going to be reimbursing us through the fee schedule for the services that we provided. But there's a middle part there where we have to get our service logs and information to Carillon, who would then feed it to Kaiser, Sutter, or wherever that child is insured. And that process is somewhat of a heavy lift. There's a lot of different forms you have to fill out and make sure things are in the right place and that the numbers are entered correctly and all of that. So there are third-party billing administrators that the goal is to make it a little bit easier for service providers. So if a school psychologist provided a group counseling session, they could enter it on our end. And that third-party biller would then take our information, feed it into the Carillon system, and then on it goes to Sutter, Kaiser, wherever it needs to go, without our staff going to multiple avenues to enter data. So there were 3 third-party administrators that presented. Care Solace, which we currently use as a matching system for families that want mental health support. We connect them with Care Solace, and then they kind of do the legwork of making calls and trying to connect families. So they're adding this TPA level to their service. It's new. We don't have that portion, but Care Solace is something that's not unfamiliar to us. MBT, Medical Billing Technologies. We use MBT for billing for students who qualify for IEP services. We talked about the difference there. Commonly referred to as LEA BOP. So we participate in that program right now for students who receive Medi-Cal services and also have IEP services. So MBT presented, and then a kind of new to me at least group called TAD Health. Each of them provided an overview on their platform, the cost of use, and then answered various questions from the consortium group. In terms of cost, the overarching method of payment is not that we pay directly for the service, but that they would take a portion of the billing as their fee for service. So it ranges anywhere from about 5 to 10%, but most of them are around 6 or 7% that they would take as their fee. And then some of our big questions were, how does this information flow from us where we have our student information systems where we're entering information? How does it flow over to Carillon? Because there needs to be a stopgap for us to say this parent has said yes to billing, or this parent has said no to being part of the fee schedule. So we had quite a robust conversation around that. Oh, you can go back, Dave. I'm not there yet. We had quite a robust conversation around that with each. And the short story is each of them has a way for us to say, this is one that we want to push forward to Carillon, and then this is one that we do not want to push forward to Carillon. So we talked through what that looks like for each system. And then also our most important question, I think, for our service providers is, how do we navigate this if we're doing LEA BOP and we do onboard to fee schedule? Is it one method of entry? Because what we don't want is for a psychologist to have to enter one way if the child has an IEP in Medi-Cal and a different way if the kid has Kaiser and no IEP. So MBT in particular is the one that we're using, and they very much have a streamlined system. If we onboarded with Care Solace, it would also be a streamlined system, but it would obviously be new to our staff because we've never used Care Solace for this service, and TAD Health would be new to all of us because we haven't used it for anything. So that was all. It was just to gain information, and it was good to know if for any reason we do go that way. That's some of the information I got out of that. Any questions about that particular one? Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know if I'm understanding you right, but it sounds like we would submit the insurance and all the billing information to the TPA, even if the parent had not consented.
No. So MBT is actually currently rolling this out with Medi-Cal billing. And so for that, because students have an IEP, we put it into what's called Cyrus, which is our IEP document service online portal, let's say. I don't know what to call it. What MBT will do is when we enter service logs right now, staff has to take those service logs and then go to a different system and re-enter that information. What MBT will do is kind of interweave with Cyrus, and staff would enter at one time and they would pull from Cyrus, our student information system, and then pass it on to, in this case, Carillon for multi-payer fee. So our question was, how do we say we only want these 4 kids to go and we don't want these 17 kids to go because these parents said yes and these parents said no. And
But
so
it sounds like it is going to the TPA to decide that, though, or to decide if it's going or not. Am I?
my
correct?
general understanding, and I'll be honest, I didn't look into all the nitty gritty of this. I just wanted to ask the question of like, is this on your radar and do you have a mechanism for this? What they described it as, there will be a way. I don't know what that looks like because I'm not necessarily in the system looking at the fee schedule side, but there will be a way for us to say, this is one that we now want to send forward to Medi-Cal billing. So, or sorry, Medi-Cal if it was for IEP students. And right now we're talking about this because MBT is able to do this with Cyrus. We are going to have to figure it out because we do have some families. We actually just talked about it today during a special education meeting. We do have some families. I think we looked in our records and we have like 4 families that had said no to the Medi-Cal billing. So we need a way before we interweave Cyrus with MBT to know that we can say, yes, these can go forward and these ones should not. And so that we're working on that right now. So I actually will get more information on it just through the IEP Medi-Cal side of it. But
Thank you.
yeah. All right. The capacity summit was an all-day thing. For the most part, went a little bit after lunch. The last half of the day was a community partner fair. So a bunch of different agencies that schools can utilize to support families with services. But the overall focus was interconnected systems of support. And really integrated approach to support multiple student needs. So not just social emotional, but their behavioral needs and their academic needs as well. And this is a big thing schools are talking about, right? Because MTSS is this idea of all these things kind of feed together. A kid might have academic concerns, but that might also lead to behavioral concerns, and there might be some social emotional concerns mixed in there as well. And I have the cognitive triangle there because it's a lot about thinking about what are our behaviors or what are our actions, but there are thoughts that lead to those actions and there are feelings that lead to those thoughts. So these things are all kind of interwoven. It's not just I don't do my homework for no reason. There was a thought there and a feeling that preceded it. And if we can interject at some point to change that train of thought, and have students feel differently about whatever it is they're choosing to do that we don't want them to do, then we can better impact their behaviors. And so that was a lot of the conversation at this capacity summit, and some of the work that we'll be doing in AUSD as well to just integrate our systems for streamlining approach too, so that we don't have people doing double work as they try to address behaviors over here and they try to address academics in a totally different silo. There was a panel discussion from various districts that have had a rollout of interconnected systems of support in different ways over the years, just to get their feedback and their experience with it. Then a very broad fee schedule overview was provided. For most of us that are in the consortium, that was just repetitive information because some of these individuals at this capacity summit, just fee schedule was new to them. And then, like I said, the end of the day was community partner fair. So that was helpful. There was some good information that came out of it in terms of, moving forward with that integrated approach and some of the work we're going to be doing anyway. Questions on that one? Okay. In May, it was a community-based organization spotlight. They chose Sierra Community Medical Foundation. So their director came and talked to us. They serve across multiple counties, Placer, Nevada, Yuba, Sutter, Colusa, and Sac counties. They serve primarily at-risk, underserved, and underinsured communities. And their programs include kind of three arms: drug safety, so they do drug pickup locations and opioid treatment information. They do physician wellness programs. We didn't really talk about that. That's for doctors who, to help with burnout and wellness libraries and peer groups. And then they also have an Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACEs coalition, to increase awareness and access for resources for students that have adverse childhood experiences, like, parents with substance abuse, divorce, death in the family, those types of things. And then we actually talked quite a bit about the drug safety, just kind of driven by other LEAs that see a need for parents to have substance abuse support programs, and some of the work that Sierra Community Medical Foundation can do in school districts to actually support parents, which then obviously better supports kids if parents need that type of help. And then last but not least, we spent some time looking at a flyer from Department of Healthcare Services and providing feedback on that in terms of clarity for families to better understand what fee schedule is, what their rights are related to fee schedule, to say yes or no, and if they say yes or no, what that means for them. So that was that one. Any questions on that one? Okay. Like I said, I skipped April because I didn't go to the office hours. But the last thing, and what I will talk a little bit more in depth about, was the Santa Clara County Office of Ed emerging role of wellness coaches. So we have wellness centers. We know we have those, and we did apply for that community schools grant that we did not receive. So at the end of next year, 2026, the wellness center funding through PCOE expires. So some of the conversations that we're now having and things that we're pondering are, how do we fill that need, right? Knowing that PCOE will not likely provide service in the way that we see it today. So the wellness coach is a new position. It's developed by, it's a new acronym. I think it's on the next slide actually, and it'll come up. But it's a new position that's emerging through the state of California specifically to support schools. And the idea here is that you would have an individual who could support some social emotional development and provide appropriate referral services, but they're not necessarily a certificated or licensed person. So they can't do what certificated or licensed people do, like provide, say, small group instruction or certainly individual. But they could take, and I'm going to talk in a minute about what that would look like, some of the work off of those licensed and certificated people so they could really streamline their efforts, and therefore we could better staff. It's a more affordable position, and it would allow us to have some manpower around some of the things that they could do through coordination and program support. Questions?
Yeah, when I was reading this, I wondered, could like an RBT fill a position like that? Because I thought they have all this behavior experience, what we're hearing a lot of, right? Our behavioral needs, so they could support behavior, but also with a little additional training, because the RBT isn't 40 hours, right, of training and supervision. So if you had an RBT in a position like this, and then they had a little bit of training from if they're working under a school psych or something, then you sort of have like a really great dual role almost working under their behavior specialist and whoever else is leading this kind of thing. That was
Are-
just my ding, ding, ding. Like, wouldn't that be cool?
Are you thinking like an RBT in terms of staffing a wellness center, or an RBT to fill this position as a
Yes,
wellness
an
coach?
yes, exactly.
Yeah, potentially. So next slide, Dave, might be helpful here. So there's a couple of ways to become a wellness coach. They have two pathways. And okay, so I did write it down. The two collaborating agencies here are the California Department of Healthcare Access and Information, HCAI. That was a new one to me. And then who we're very familiar with, Department of Healthcare Services. So those two are working in partnership together to build these programs and support school districts in building a workforce around wellness coaches. So you could be a wellness coach by having a high school diploma or equivalent, an associate's degree that gives some majors there, and then you would have fieldwork experience, 400 hours total. And then the second level here would be a wellness 2, which is certification or associates in a related field, and a bachelor's degree in any of those things, plus 800 hours of total field experience needed. And so those are things when districts would be hiring wellness coaches, you'd basically have two tiers in terms of hourly rate for 1 and 2s.
What's the field experience like? Because it seems like there's it seems like there's prerequisites, but there's no like test or official training, but there's field work.
Yeah, so
So that could
this
just
it's
be, I've worked at a school and someone signed, I worked this many hours at a school.
yeah, so they should be my understanding, and this is all still, so right now, wellness coaches, the plan is to hopefully have wellness coaches be billable to the fee schedule, but they're not yet accepted as billable to the fee schedule. So,
Are RBTs?
I don't actually know that. I could look. I'm not sure, but wellness coaches are not yet on there, and this program is still being built. So, I think more will come, but my understanding, at least in terms of field experience, is it could be in a private sector. It might be, providing similar services through social work, like you're in a group home or something like that. And you would have to have some sort of documentation of those. I mean, you couldn't just say I did it, but there's a documentation process for these number of hours. The list of how they would accept those field work hours, I don't know the totality of, but I know some of those things have been discussed as people having past experience that could be counted.
Some of it's on this slide.
Yeah.
I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting.
And then one more slide, Dave. Here's another way with a workforce pathway. So you may not have, the specific type of major, but you do have some type of associate's degree, or for a wellness coach to a bachelor's degree. But then in that case, you would need additional fieldwork hours. So upwards of 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours for a wellness 2 coach. All right. So then next slide, what does this mean? And so this is actually an example that was provided during the presentation from Series Unified. So they used to have what they called a student support specialist. And that student support specialist has been in place in their school for quite some time, but it aligned very well with what the wellness coach positions are looking like. So what they're in the process of doing is taking their support specialist positions and changing them over to wellness coach positions, with the idea also, I would assume, that when they're accepted to fee schedule, these individuals' work is then billable to fee schedule, which it wouldn't be if they had a different title. Here are some of the things that I'm going to just call them wellness coaches do, and previously they're support specialists. They're out there at lunch, they're out there running activities to build rapport with students, staff, and parents. Obviously, another visibility person on campus. They communicate regularly with people, especially when they're out and about. Monitor, evaluate, and communicate student progress, including linking them with mental health services like our Care Solace, for example. They could help provide referrals for families and work through some of that. They're members of the crisis response team. They all train all of their wellness coaches on QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer. And that's an suicide prevention mechanism that schools use. They deliver prevention and early intervention SEL supports. So a whole class, for example, they might do some whole class lessons out of curriculum that you would have for SEL. Maybe a class is observing that kids are having some problems with friendships, or positive resolution on the playground when disagreements happen. So they could come in and do some whole class lessons. And then they run wellness center activities like mental health fairs, SEL weeks, which is a lot of going out at lunch, promoting activities, talking to kids. They participate on their multi-tiered systems of support teams and are part of their PBIS teams as well. And then tier 2 intervention for substance use. So there are some things like brief intervention and things that people can be trained on pretty quickly through various agencies. And so people can be certified to provide brief intervention when kids say are vaping on campus, and it's an intervention, evidence-based intervention model. So those are some of the things that Series is doing and is a potential for wellness coaches. Again, the idea being that they take kind of those lower level pieces that our counselors and psychs would currently be doing off their plates. So then counselors and psychs could focus more of their time on the licensed professional and certificated work. That's all I have. Questions?
I got one question.
Yeah.
Roughly, since the start of this, when we became part of the this program, we'll start to work with it. Can you tell me an estimated how many hours has been spent on this, and maybe moving forward, potentially how many hours more you're looking at?
Yeah, each monthly session, I want to say, I can't recall actually if they're 90 minutes. I think they're 90-minute sessions. We usually are there for about an hour. Sometimes if people have lots of questions, we go for 90 minutes. So I spend about an hour to an hour and a half a month in the consortium meetings. And of course, like the one at Santa Clara Office County of Ed was an additional time, but roughly speaking, about an hour and a half. I don't spend a ton of time outside of that unless they say something that sparks my interest, right? Like I started researching more about or looking more into wellness coach stuff because I thought, okay, what are we going to do now that we need to staff our wellness center? So I'm just kind of, or find a replacement, if you will, for that. So I started to do a little bit more research around that. But other than that, at this point, I just kind of take the time to absorb it. There isn't a ton of things for us to do because we're not moving forward with fee schedule. The other benefit to us is that part of the consortium is that you have a plan for how you want to expend the dollars that through PCOE's grant. Are the dollars that PCOE allocated or tagged for AUSD go to our wellness center. So there's reporting requirements in terms of data collection, but both us and another neighboring school district, our wellness centers are funded that way. And so PCOE completes those reports for us. So we go through them and look at them and talk about what's being submitted for PCOE's grant through Department of Healthcare Services, but we actually don't have to complete the reports. So that's actually a time saver because that would have taken me probably 2-3 hours every time our reports due, but I don't actually have to do it, which is great. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Can you tell me where we are as far as preparing for this? Because I was under the impression that when we were not going to continue with the wellness center, we were kind of like making this a smaller footprint. And I just want to see where you're
Tell me more about that smaller footprint.
Well, I didn't think that we were going to be replacing the people in the wellness center with our own people, wholly.
Well, and honestly, we couldn't because what they staff is 2 fully credentialed and some of them duly licensed individuals, which is I don't know, $300,000 lift probably per site. So that's about just called $1 million across 3 sites. So No, we're not going to just one for one probably replace what's in the wellness centers, but our wellness centers, and that goes back to some of the data we collected, right, and showed our wellness centers do provide a service to our sites. So I think just dropping off and saying they were here and then next year they're not, we have to find some way to fill the
Yeah,
need.
I agree.
So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. I just will offer my 2 cents that I think a lot of these, on your slide where it says roles of students, support specialist / wellness coach, that seems like things that are, pretty significant duties. And to bring somebody in who, is not licensed or even credentialed to do something like that, I would have a worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see some of these things, you could probably use a yard duty for some of them, checking in with the kids at their lunch, that type of thing.
Mhm.
But other things, it's like, those seem more significant to me than having somebody who's got 800 hours of, walking a kid back and forth at preschool. If that's, I don't know what the level of the hours, what the work involved is in those numbers of hours. And so I would be really interested in knowing that before we moved forward and attempted to hire people based on very vague outline of what.
Oh, sure. We're not there at all, just so you know. So that's what Series uses their wellness coaches for, or previously called whatever they were called. I can't recall.
Yeah.
Now they're turning them into wellness coaches. If we were to move forward in that way, there's several steps that would have to happen. First of all, and this is my assumption, that's going to be a classified person. So we have to generate a job description. That job description has to come to the board and it also has to be negotiated with CSEA. So there's a whole process where we would draft a job description that not only says what are your job duties, but what knowledge and skills do you have to have, what sort of certifications or things do you have to come in with, right? Like you couldn't hire me if I didn't have an admin credential. So that's on the job description, right? That kind of thing. So we would draft a job description that would go to CSEA for approval. Once we worked it out with CSEA, that would come to you ultimately as the board for approval. We can't add new positions without you approving both the job description and then the budgetary components related to salary. So both those things would come. Then once those things came and they were approved, then we would post jobs. Then we would hire for those positions. But all of those things take a significant amount of time, right? So that's why I'm thinking about it now, but this is like early thinking about it, right? In the summer, I'll dig in a little more. In the fall, we're talking about, if that's the way we're going to go, then in the fall, we're talking about job descriptions are getting approved. We're posting them in the spring or maybe, early to late spring. We're hiring for the following year. So we have to be ahead of the curve almost 12 to 18 months, right? Where we're sitting now before we want to hire somebody. So we're in early stages of it, but it is interesting to me to think about the fact that those types of positions, they're now for lack of a better term, certifications of some kind for it, right? Because we could write a job description and say, hey, I mean, obviously Series did it, right? We want you to come and here's what you're going to do. And we're going to hire you as a classified person even prior to something like 400 hours or 2,700 hours, depending on which type of position you're qualifying for. So there's lots of steps to come, but at least it's on your radar to know about because it's a more viable way than 2 certificated individuals, which is what the Wellness Center has now. So
Do you know if, I mean, I don't know how much that type of position would pay versus what Amber's talking about, the RBT.
yeah, well, okay, so like a special education para, including statutories, which is like their benefits and what have you, 30, 40, good, roughly $40,000 a year for a para. And then an RBT is typically around there to slightly more. So, 40 to 50. Somewhere, and that includes benefits, not necessarily all salary. So a wellness coach is probably, if I had to make a guess, somewhere in that ballpark. So even if you hired, a wellness coach and a second counselor, let's say, you're at $200,000 per school site, and now that's 600 versus 9. I mean, you're making a significant cut to the overall cost. Can we afford that? I don't know, right? That's a Jeremy question that we'll keep talking about before we get there. But it becomes a bigger possibility than when we're thinking about just 2 certificated people per se. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have a number of thoughts.
Mhm.
I've been kind of writing some notes down.
Mhm.
one, I understand this is just from series. It's just their example of what they're doing.
Mhm.
But I would be really hesitant to want to bring something like a mental health fair to the campuses. It seems like there's a pretty strong social contagion aspect to a lot of mental health things. So I don't know that would be in our best interest. Just a thought. But I also was wondering, if this can be a classified employee, would we be better served as a district bringing somebody else on, again, it's not necessarily in this role, but somebody really just like another janitorial or maintenance person to help us with our campuses. Looking at EV Kane, looking at some of the needs like at Auburn recently, seems like there's never ending work there. And I almost wonder if just having, these campuses maintained better is also going to help in a lot of these other areas and how people feel about going to school. And so,
Yeah.
just kind of a thought that I had.
Well, and it's not a thought that it's also a thought we've had because we're working on that as well, right? So I don't disagree with you. And there's actually research around school safety, and schools are less likely to be targets if they just look nicer than the school down the street, right? So there is research around school safety, generally speaking, and campus beautification. So that's certainly something we're thinking about. And to the point about mental health fairs, that's certainly series job description. That's a literal slide taken from the webinar. It doesn't have to be ours, and that's we're not going to add all of those things. So yeah, but
I
that
just
is one example of how
strong
they
enough
use
to
it.
say
Yep, I appreciate it. Yeah. Anything else? Good.
Thank
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving then to 11B, the March 2025 board policy updates, first read.
Always brilliant.
She's the all-time quarterback.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to take this one, or
You're the
you
all-time
want to do it?
quarterback, is what
Okay.
we just said.
I think we have 4 or
Also,
3.
real quick,
Four.
Jeremy, would you mind hitting the lights over here, please?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we have.
Thank you.
I
Oh.
love that.
Oh,
Oh,
Look at that.
Oh.
Everybody wait.
Nice folks.
Okay. I think we had 2 we wanted you to read in full, and those
Mhm.
are provided a copy in there. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but one is science instruction and one is social studies. Were there others, Amber, that you were thinking of? Sorry.
There was one around cybersecurity. I have some post-its. I know there was the cell phone. We wanted to look at the
was those
different
2 things.
options, the 2 different language options around cell phone limiting or cell phone banning. And then but there was one before that.
It was the
Um,
district records and cybersecurity one. I
Yeah.
think we were gonna talk with that.
Yep, that's right.
With Dave, maybe.
Actually, what I think the conversation was, sorry about that. Let me pull it up. And I should have pulled the page numbers ahead of time, but let me find it.
I know it's policy 3580. District records.
All right, let me find it real quick. 516, almost. Okay, oh, that's the reg, hold on. Go up. All right, so the first one on district records is 3580, and it starts on page 39 of the packet. And I actually wrote down here, and I think maybe President Holt, this is, something for you to give us some feedback on too, but when we had talked about the data breach that happened, we had said, let's bring some policy back by August in terms of what we're going to do should there be a breach. This policy then came through. So if we look at just directly under the blue box, on page 2. So page 2 of the policy directly under the blue box, it starts to talk about cybersecurity. So it talks about the superintendent shall ensure the confidentiality of records as required by law and shall establish regulations to safeguard against damage, loss, or theft, including damage, loss, or theft which may be caused by cybersecurity breaches. And then it goes on further about notification. So if you go to the next blue box directly under there, it talks about if the district discovers or is notified that a breach of security of district records has resulted in the release of personal information, the superintendent or designee shall notify every individual whose personal information was or is reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person. And it goes on from there. So I think our question, and this doesn't necessarily have to be answered this evening, but our question was, does this policy kind of meet the goals of what we were thinking of drafting and bringing forward in August? Or not, and if not, what are we missing so that we can kind of think about what we might want to look at additionally?
I think
So-
the only thing I'm seeing missing is a timeline, unless I'm just not seeing that.
Yeah,
It just says timely
timely.
manner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a specific timeline would be,
But that, there is a sentence at the bottom that's, indicates that it needs to be for 500 students or more. And I mean, the last time that happened, it was a handful of students and we were able to notify all of them. And I think that's important.
that one
to do
is
that?
ed code, and that would be us
Notification.
notifying the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, I believe.
Okay.
So that's,
So we only notify them if it's a larger.
Yeah, we're
Correct.
required to notify all individuals we're aware of. But if
Okay.
it reaches 500 or more, then we have to do an additional reporting
Okay.
to that agency. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and of course this is another one where we could look at the potential of adding language. So I guess, and maybe we talk about this a little bit now, like what would a reasonable timeline look like, right? I mean, we probably couldn't do it in 24 hours. But we certainly could do it in, 10 days is a pretty typical timeline, but does that feel like too long? What are your
How
thoughts on the
about,
board?
just, thought here, language, I think each situation, it can be different and it's kind of pinpoint a time down. What if we drafted or thought about something around, when parents will be, notified when a proper investigation has been completed?
I think that takes too long. That could be.
What was the turnaround on the last one? I know it was pretty quick because it was a
And
small
some kind
number.
of internal investigation?
Well, in answer to your question, Amber, I'd have to look, but I believe it happened on a weekend. In fact, I'm 99% sure because I think I was calling on Saturday hoping someone answered and she did, which was great. And I think we notified Tuesday. It was early in the
I
week.
think so.
It
So-
was by
Saturday,
Tuesday, I
then
think.
Tuesday.
Yeah. So I want to say, I don't think it was Monday because I was still waiting to hear back on a few things, but I believe it was Tuesday. So call it 48 hours if you're not counting.
Business,
it-
48.
Yeah, 2 business
hours.
days. Yeah.
But I can see how that wouldn't always be possible if you don't have all the relevant information that you need in order to notify. I'm
Right.
assuming is what would be time consuming.
Right. And in that particular case, it was 6 students, I want to say, and I called them all. Right. So
Yeah.
that's doable. If it's 125 students, then we're probably drafting something and sending it. And we just have to make sure we draft it correctly and all of that. But, I will be honest that in all cases, 48 hours is probably pretty fast, but I don't know what seems reasonable.
Do you think you could have like an email or letter drafted in 48 hours and then, ensure all are contacted within 10 days or something? Like you could have an initial email just notifying that a breach occurred, maybe
may
without
have
any
been.
details.
I see what you say. Because the other piece is like, I could certainly see where it's like, and Dave, maybe you can chime in too if you have additional information, but we could know that a breach happened and not necessarily know who all of those individuals
Right.
are, correct?
Mm.
30 to 90 for government and then 60 for HIPAA.
Actually don't know if ed code does, because we were looking into it with that one in February. But if they do use their recommendation.
Why don't we'll do a little digging and then bring back in June what we have. And if we don't know yet and we want to either approve it as is because it has some components and then we can amend later, we can discuss that in June. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm leaning towards, no more than though like a 5 business days, at least for an initial, you may have been, your information may have been compromised in a breach. Something that's so that people are aware that information could be out there.
Yeah, I like that, just putting something out there, letting the students and their families know whether or not they were compromised, it may have happened.
And even then, only the people we suspect, not
But then,
not the whole district.
right, then we'll, yeah, fine tune it.
Okay. Let us look at that and bring some things back and I'll think on it a little bit. I will say, I think about this as a parent too. If I receive something that said your child's information may have been
Mhm.
released and that goes out to, I mean, let's just say something happens with, we'll think about kind of a worst case scenario. Something happens with Cyrus and we have to say our individualized education plan data collection system may have been compromised and we send that out to every kid. We will receive, I mean, how many students do we have in special education? 2. We will receive 285 phone calls. I would call, right? And say, do you know if my kid was or not? And if you're not sure, what went out? And it becomes, I think, more detrimental to our trust with parents if we tell them something that may or may not be true and we don't have a lot of detail. And then the answer is just, well, we're not sure if it's your kid and we're actually not sure what data went out, right? So I don't want to hold information back from people 100%, but I also don't want to create more havoc in their life than is necessary if we don't actually have enough information to give them. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think there's a fine line to walk there, but worth looking into. So why don't we'll do a little digging and see what we can bring back to you in June.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe like see what kind of turnaround time it takes generally to solve that question of what data was lost.
I think that too, it really depends on what the incident was, right? Was
Right.
it that some unauthorized person was seen in the district office near a computer that was on, right? Because that would be a breach that would have to be investigated and try to figure out, go back and look at what they saw, or like the previous example with PCOE where a link was sent out to people it shouldn't have been shared with. So I think it all kind of depends on the situation.
Okay. All right, we'll bring that back. The next one is, okay, so
Yeah.
this is the one where you have to choose an option. This is the cell phone one. Thank you, Amber, for remembering that.
5131.
5131.8. Let me see if I can find a page number for you. Almost. 0.6. Not yet. There it is.
While we're looking for a
110. Sorry, go ahead.
one thing I didn't notice when we were looking through this the first time that I noticed now, so in the blue box above the different options, one thing it says is that ed code requires significant stakeholder participation in the development of the policy to ensure that the policy is responsive to the unique needs and desires of students. That to me sounds like we're talking about this as a policy, but then we'd want participation from the community in some way to weigh in on this. Is that kind of what that's saying? Is that what ed code's saying there?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, well, we would never want to make decisions on things that we put in place in the classroom without getting some feedback.
Yeah.
I think it is fair to say that whether it was done formally, I think there's a decent amount of feedback that comes from staff in particular and parents that, cell phone usage during class is an issue, right?
Yeah.
So having a way to limit that and sort of provide some sort of guardrails, I think, for kid use or having their phones on campus is important. So you know, I think either one of these things that we pick in option 1 or 2, I don't think are going to be coloring outside the lines, if you will, of what educators are expressing to us.
Great. That's what I was thinking
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you get there, under the first blue box, the language we wanted to first discuss is in the top paragraph. I made a note about that, that starts with the governing board recognizes. I think this was, Amber, you wanted to talk about this if this was a statement the board wanted to make. Is that correct?
I think that was me.
That was,
Oh, that
yeah,
was you, Emily. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
It just says the governing board recognizes that student use of smartphones and other mobile communication devices on campus may be beneficial to student learning and well-being and could be harmful and disruptive of the instructional program in some circumstances. I, for one, completely disagree with that. And I don't see it as beneficial whatsoever.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we were both a little bit like, oh, when is
So I
a
don't wanna
cell
put-
phone
I don't wanna
beneficial?
Cell phone, need to put that in there.
Yeah, so I don't want to put,
Yeah, somebody's
we
middle
recognize
schooler
something
added
that we're not recognizing. I just wanted to. Bring that one
I
up.
agree with you there. So we'd want to strike that first sentence
Uh,
or both, or
Well, because it continues that students may use smartphones and other mobile communication devices only as permitted under this policy. I guess that's fine
Mhm.
if then we don't permit them.
Yeah, depending on what option we end up
Well,
going
and-
with,
and
because
actually,
they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sorry, I was interrupting. Would we want to actually keep part of it? So we'd say like the governing board recognizes that student use of smartphones and other mobile communications devices on campus
Could be harmful.
could be harmful.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think we
And
strike
disrupt- yeah.
from campus too.
I think that makes more sense either way. With either option, that makes more sense. It aligns better with the point.
So
Yeah.
we would say may
Policy.
be harmful and disruptive.
Yes.
So we would strike from beneficial to could be.
Yes.
So it'll say may be harmful and disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, keep pointing out.
Yep. Oh, wait.
She's close.
Thanks. Yeah, we were gonna keep. That's right. Or do we want maybe or could be?
I like could be, but
Okay, so let's keep could be.
I
So
would
that's the
say
way you
yes.
struck it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that paragraph I have, and we'll bring that back with amended language. And then the choice is, if you look at the blue box there, the following two options offer different approaches to regulating the use of smartphones. And not that anyone's in disagreement, but the law is that we have to have some sort of regulation on smartphones. We couldn't say we're not going to regulate them. So
Yeah.
we have to choose a way to regulate them. And then we could also revise this policy in another way, but they're just kind of providing us with two common options that could be choices to use. Option 1 limits the use of smartphones or other mobile communication devices to non-instructional time. What that might look like is before school, after school, or probably at lunch, to be honest, if you're saying non-instructional time. Option 2 below prohibits the use of smartphones and other mobile communication devices while at a school site or under the supervision and control of a district employee.
I suspect I know where you two ladies were leaning on this.
yeah, I mean, I don't think students in TK through 8 should be on a phone during school at all. The more I've thought about it, I mean, option 2 doesn't say they can't have them there at all. And I do recognize we have a lot of students who don't go home after school. And so they have a phone with them in their backpack for some reason. So that I don't see a problem with as long as they don't come out. But I think those of us who have students at school or work in schools, like kids in between classes looking at their phones and watching videos, it's not necessary, and I definitely don't think it's healthy or good for our students. So I definitely lean toward the second option.
I concur.
I agree, actually. I already like the fact that Skyridge does similar to this. I remember one time it was like in pickup line and you could hear on the other side, "You're not supposed to have your phone." And so she hung up. So I really do think that there's no reason they can go to the office. They can go to the office anytime and ask to use the phone.
And they do.
No, I completely agree as well.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be, kids shouldn't be on their smartphones with unrestricted access to the internet during the school day. With kids who just doesn't need to happen.
And I will say, overhearing the conversations I overhear of middle schoolers, the things they are doing and looking at, not good, not good.
And, you know, I recognize too that just having this policy doesn't make any change
No.
other than just giving more strength for staff to enforce it. So I hope that's the direction that we go.
Yeah, and I know my conversations with teachers, friends that are teachers, coworkers, colleagues are, it's always been hard to, when there's not a policy and not a top-down approach, they feel like they have to enforce something without any support. And I think it's important to have a policy around it.
And on the flip side, I will say, most of the time when I'm visiting a campus and I see a parent, they're talking to me about cell phones. They do not want them. To a man, every parent that I've spoken to. So I feel like we'll have the parent support on this.
And, you know, to that also, there hasn't been a time I've been on campus where I haven't observed at least one student using their phone when they shouldn't have been.
Good deal.
So it sounds like we're moving towards
Yep.
option 2. Jaden?
I'm in favor of option 2 as well, so.
All right, so we'll bring it back with option 2 as the choice. Okay, and then the last two, we asked you to read in full for this evening. These are both optional policies, but language has been updated. So I think the question is, what are the thoughts on the language? And correct me if I'm wrong, Emily and Amber, but I think also the question is, do we need the policies at all, given that they're optional? So the first one is on science instruction, 6142.93, and then directly following 6142.94 on history, social science instruction. So we can start with the first one.
So I will give my comments. Part most of this language is kind of regurgitating what the ed code says. And so I think it's a little duplicative and maybe unnecessary to have the policies at all. If the board would rather have the policies, then I take issue with some of the wording and some of it. But if not, if you guys also agree that it's redundant, then I won't carry on.
And Brittany, is it, can you maybe answer that or clarify that? Is it already in ed code?
Yeah, there's ed code around, you know, what we can teach in schools, right? On the first policy in science, there's essentially like a separation of church and state religious theories kind of piece. That's already in ed code. And then there's also adopted California state standards for all of our core instruction, these two subjects as well as math and ELA, well, physical education, all kinds of them, right? And then our requirements as a school district is to teach to those standards. So I agree with Emily that the majority of this is already outlined within ed code.
Yeah, and I know specifically you wanted to talk about it probably for one line. When I read that line, so philosophical and religious theories that are based at least in part on faith and are not subject to scientific test and refutation should not be discussed during science instruction. The second time I read that as like the teacher shouldn't incorporate that as a part of instruction, which makes sense to me. I don't know why they would include any of that in a science lesson. So I was curious if you
Well,
read it differently.
Well, because it says shouldn't be discussed. And to me, that's kind of like group discussion among the class. Like
So
if
I
it
wasn't-
gets brought up
Yeah,
by somebody, like,
that's how I
is
thought
it
you
shut
read
down
it.
and
Yeah.
then in what manner? I
So
don't
I
know.
think that part's maybe not clear.
Yeah.
And because I read it as the teacher shouldn't
Right.
instruct on that,
Right,
which
and
makes
I think
sense to me. But if the
It's a
discussion
little
has-
loosey-goosey.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
Me-
that seems a little overly broad.
maybe
Mhm.
that's the piece that maybe it doesn't need to be there at all. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is an issue that's coming up in classrooms or not, to be honest.
I mean, nothing has come to my attention this year. No.
So being that this is optional policy, I mean, I think was the question, do we even need it at all, our existing one? If it's just kind of virtue signaling statement, like, is it even necessary?
Well, and if we don't even know if it's virtue signaling, because we don't know what it means. So maybe, yeah, if it's optional and it's unclear.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe
It-
we just strike it.
It is, okay, so, oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong policy. Never mind, ignore me. I was reading the wrong thing. I was just reading the cell phone one that says there's something mandated, and I was like, wait, did we miss something? But I was reading the wrong policy.
Okay.
And that was my understanding when we spoke with Laura, that these are optional policies that we
Mhm.
have adopted in the past. Therefore, we're updating these policies. So I believe that that's correct. They're optional.
Yeah, so why don't we strike them both?
I agree with that.
I'm in favor of striking them both. I think it has a potential of opening something up that doesn't need to be opened.
Doesn't mean I don't like some of the things, especially in the history one
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
personal testimony. But
But if that's
We-
already an ed code, it's already an expectation.
we
Right.
can already do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't see anything. Was there something specific that? in
On the social studies? one?
Yeah, I didn't notice anything in that one.
I don't know.
I think we just said discuss because
I think it was probably more virtue signaling, in my opinion, especially that first paragraph, but.
Oh, I
Again,
didn't
it's
see it.
optional, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly have nothing that I've seen that I don't care for in the history, social science instruction one, at least what we currently have. Not necessarily the one that they're suggesting, but I like our current policy. I just don't know that we need one. And if we don't need it, then we shouldn't have it.
Cool.
Agreed.
Okay, so then we'll look at the approval of the March during second read. Absent 6142.93 and 6142.94. And I will do a look at our board policy if there's anything around when we remove a policy. If there's an extra step, for example, that has to be taken. So I'll bring that back in June if there is. I'll do a little more research. I think that was it for discussion on the
It was. Yeah.
items, correct?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was.
Any
that was
other
okay.
questions or thoughts around March that we need to talk about?
No, I know.
Doesn't look like it. So moving then to 11C, amendment to AR 6172 on the gifted and talented student program.
Really am up quite a bit. Okay, so we had recently we assessed students to see whether or not they qualified for gifted and talented. In previous years, we had tested third grade students, but we missed it. So this year we tested, or last year we missed it. So we tested all third and fourth graders this year. The way that our policy was previously written, and if you open that, it'll have the red line for you. It talks about the gate, it talks about gate testing, students being recommended. And then it talks about consent being obtained before administering any assessments, meaning we have to then do what's called active consent. Every parent has to turn in a permission slip to have their student assessed for gate testing. What we would prefer to do is passive consent, which means, again, moving forward, it would be all third graders. So prior to the start of fourth grade, which for us would mean third grade students, we would test students and we would notify parents that testing was happening and that they have an option to opt their child out of gate assessment. But if they did not opt their child out of gate assessment, then we would assume passive consent and test their child for a gifted and talented program. And that's a test given just on one day. It doesn't take very long. And the full class takes the test just to see who would qualify. Any questions about that?
What would be the reason to change the type of notification?
So sometimes parents just forget, they're busy. We have a lot of parents who work multiple jobs or a kid that just forgets to give them the permission slip that's in their backpack. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I could look if you're interested. I believe there's some research around it too, that, we're more likely to identify kids and then properly serve them for GATE if we assess all students, because the ones who typically don't, aren't assessed are sometimes in underserved populations, and then we don't necessarily identify them for GATE, and they're missing out on things that they would otherwise have access to. So, a lot of districts have moved to this kind of passive consent model just to make sure we're identifying all of our GATE students as much as humanly possible.
I'd really like to hear more about what we can do to revitalize it. The program seems like it kind of died off with COVID and hasn't done much since. I know a long time ago, they used to have pretty good, even like summer programs. So love to see what we can develop with this.
Yeah. And we worked on a GATE handbook that I think last year, but kind of got finalized this fall. We have GATE coordinators at each site that will be stipended positions starting next year. And then Kara's working to look at some training for our GATE coordinators so that they, will be able to, the idea is that they would provide some help to teachers on campuses to differentiate for student learning in the classroom. And then our goal is to run some specialty programs after school, for example, that students would have access to. Our GATE qualified students would have access to expand their learning too. So that's kind of what we're looking at as our first steps for next year. And this is first read. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll bring it back for second read and approval on June 12th.
Thank you. And moving to our facilities update.
Yeah, so this is a busy time of year for facilities. We're gearing up for our summer projects. We're doing a lot of fire clearance. We've completed work at Alta Vista with contractors. We're working with the Skyridge staff to clear out brush there. We've had PCWA assist us in clearing out brush. We might have to hire a contractor depending on the workload, but those things are on our top priority. We were contacted by the fire chief in Auburn just to make sure that we were on it, and we'll notify him once we've completed the work. The Sherland Tract property, we had probation out. They weren't able to completely finish it, and we were able to get a contractor to finish the work out there. So just making sure that that's a high priority and taking care of. The construction for EV Kane is going to start next week. I talked to the contractor today, so they're gearing up and getting ready to start. So we'll see some action out there. And we're trying to get the projects lined up for Skyridge for the shade structure and the ball wall that are going in. And we're working on tables for EV Kane. Some of the pocket tables are hard to get out, so we're looking at freestanding tables that we can move around that don't have to secure into the wall, just to, make it an easier, quicker process. There's a lot of other projects that Dave's working on. He's doing the acting role of maintenance director and doing a great job. So with that, any questions?
Will the construction company be out at EV Kane this week before school's out? Like,
Yeah.
will parents see that there's construction?
That's the plan this next week. There's going to be fences up and some dirt
Okay.
moved and
Nice.
hopefully some destruction.
Hard hats.
You
and all that?
heard today, right? Today's Thursday, so you met with them.
Yeah.
They said they're coming because
Yes.
Jeremy told them that I'm making him go out with a hard hat and a pickaxe if they don't do something. So
And you
he's
would.
pushing. Yeah.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you.
To board governance and update on requests.
I don't have any additional updates on requests since last time, I don't believe, but I can also bring those back in June if there was anything left or anything anyone had a question about. Okay.
And do we have any new requests from this evening? I think so. Nothing
have
outside of
none.
kind of what we're moving forward on. And actually, if we, I know we're right about to be done here, but if we could take like a 5-minute recess, I've got to use the restroom. So, 5-minute recess. It's 9:04. We'll be back in here. Let's say 9:10. Seriously. we are back here and get started on the comments from the board and superintendent.
So there's quite a bit going on at schools, that we're experiencing right now at this time. But I think I'll take my time this evening to do a little bit of a different type of remembrance. So last week on Friday, unfortunately, the Skyridge community lost a student, fifth grader, John Letcher, who passed away. And when something like that happens, obviously our thoughts go out to the family. It's unimaginable. And there are also larger impacts that happen for our kids that are at school, and obviously had quite a relationship with John. And although it is not anything anyone hopes to be a part of, I was able to be part of the remembrance circles that they did in the fifth grade classes there at Skyridge on Friday. And I'll share just a few things that they said because it was quite lovely. The kids all went around. I think they went through 5 or 6 boxes of Kleenex. But, for 10 and 11-year-old kids, it was their remembrances were just something else. They talked about how quick John was with a smile and how open he was with hugs and how affectionate he was and kind. Just overall, his kindness reached all the students of Skyridge, but in particular his fifth grade peers. And they spent a lot of time talking about Camp Augusta and how happy they were to see him there and all that they were able to do together. And it just was such a positive thing to sit there and think about. That was just not too long ago. I mean, they went several weeks ago, but for them to have that experience together, I think was just so meaningful for them. And I hope meaningful for John. It seemed like it was from their remembrances. The staff also shared from classroom teachers to wellness center staff when John would participate in lunch groups and build apparently lovely structures out of magnet tiles. And during his last one of his last meetings at the school that he was there for with his parents, he built a structure out of these kind of noodle situations that the teacher had taken a picture of and was reflecting on. So it was a sad time, but also a positive time. There were a lot of smiles and a lot of laughs remembering the good times with him there at Skyridge. And so our thanks go out to the staff who put that together. And of course, our thoughts go out to John and his family and his brother, who's also a student at Skyridge. So if everyone's willing, I think it would be nice if we just take a moment of silence to think our own thoughts about John and his family, and then we can reconvene for comments. Thank you for that. The school's also going to be working on, and with the family, obviously, on putting together some type of memorial. The kids had a lot of ideas, and so I think we all look forward to seeing what they come up with. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Superintendent. Absolutely. My heart goes out to the Letcher family and John and everyone who was a part of his community. It's a pretty profound loss. So, yeah, thank you. If there's no other comment, then it is 9:14 and this meeting is adjourned.